Breaking what just happened inside occupied territory has left the entire Kremlin in shock. A single Ukrainian fighter jet worth nearly $30 million has just obliterated one of Russia's most fortified and high-value bases. The explosion was so massive that even residents more than 40 kilometers away reported their windows shattering, the night sky glowing in a furious orange blaze. For years, Moscow had claimed this base was untouchable. But in one precise, breathtaking strike, it's gone. Reduced to ashes. This wasn't just another raid. This was a surgical demolition of what many analysts called the spinal nerve of Russia's southern command structure. Satellite images released hours later show a charred wasteland where a sprawling compound once stood, hangars melted, radar domes flattened, and hundreds of military trucks left smoldering. The attack lasted less than 2 minutes, yet it wiped out a facility Moscow had spent years building. The target? A command hub coordinating drone warfare, missile logistics, and advanced radar systems covering Crimea and parts of the Black Sea. And just like that, it's off the map. Reports from inside Russia suggest panic spread instantly through nearby units. Soldiers scrambled in the dark, radio chatter broke down, and commanders issued contradictory orders as fires raged uncontrolled. "We thought it was an earthquake." One local resident was quoted whispering before Russian authorities seized his phone. By morning, Russian social media channels were flooded with unverified videos showing fireballs tearing through the compound, followed by a haunting silence. Moscow tried to block them, but the images had already gone viral. According to Ukrainian defense officials, the strike was carried out using one of Kyiv's most advanced aircraft, an F-16 recently integrated into Ukrainian service, armed with Western-guided munitions. The cost of the aircraft? $30 million. The impact of its mission? Immeasurable. The jet is said to have flown at extreme low altitude, below radar detection, cutting through Russian defenses like a ghost in the night. The moment it fired, the world's attention turned once again to this war's most explosive front. And the symbolism couldn't be clearer. Russia, which for months boasted about impenetrable air defenses, suddenly finds itself humiliated on the global stage. Billions spent on S-400 systems evaporated in a single strike. Generals once confident now face the question no one dares to ask aloud: how did Ukraine pull this off right under Moscow's nose? What's even more alarming for the Kremlin is where this happened. This wasn't a base near the front lines. It was deep inside a supposedly safe zone inside the protective ring that Moscow had long declared secure. For a Ukrainian aircraft to penetrate that far means that Russian detection grids have failed spectacularly. And that failure is not just military, it's psychological. Every Russian base commander across the occupied south now wonders, are we next? Footage circulating online shows emergency convoys racing toward the blaze, only to be stopped by massive secondary explosions. Ammunition stockpiles hidden beneath the base kept detonating for hours, lighting up the sky. Eyewitnesses compared the scene to a volcano erupting. Firefighters were ordered to stay back as drones buzzed overhead, capturing the destruction in eerie clarity. Russian channels later claimed sabotage by internal agents, but insiders quietly admitted it was a coordinated Ukrainian airstrike, guided by precise Western intelligence. For Moscow, the timing couldn't be worse. This strike comes amid growing unrest inside Russia. Fuel shortages, factory slowdowns, and internal criticism from oligarchs who are beginning to question Putin's promises. Losing such a crucial base isn't just a tactical loss, it's a blow to national pride. Kremlin spokespersons rushed to control the narrative, calling it an accident. But even pro-Russian bloggers mocked the claim, saying, "Accidents don't cause mushroom clouds." Across Ukraine, the mood was electric. Crowds gathered in Kyiv squares, waving flags, cheering as news spread. This wasn't merely about a military victory, it was about sending a message that no Russian position, no matter how far, is safe anymore. Western allies quietly celebrated too. A senior NATO officer reportedly told journalists off record, "This changes the map. Moscow will have to rethink everything." But here's the question that's haunting everyone from generals to politicians. How did Ukraine manage to coordinate such a flawless operation under Russia's nose? Was it purely Ukrainian planning? Or did NATO's advanced intelligence network lend a hand? And if this is just the beginning of a new wave of precision strikes, what does it mean for Russia's ability to defend its occupied territories? Because this strike isn't just about one destroyed base. It's about exposure, the sudden realization that even Russia's deepest, most protected facilities are vulnerable. For the first time in months, Moscow's generals are panicking behind closed doors. The Kremlin corridors are reportedly filled with arguments, blame, and fear. One leaked message allegedly described the mood as complete paralysis. And as dawn rose over the smoking ruins, one truth became undeniable. Ukraine has crossed a new threshold. This isn't the same war that began years ago. This is an era of surgical, high-tech dominance, where precision and planning outweigh sheer numbers. So now the world is watching. Moscow is cornered, humiliated, and unsure who to trust even within its own ranks. Meanwhile, Kyiv's message echoes across the world. We can strike you anywhere. But what exactly led to this moment? How did Ukraine prepare for such an audacious attack? What weaknesses did it exploit inside the Russian defense network? And most importantly, what happens next? When the Kremlin realizes that its most valuable assets are no longer safe. Stay with us, because what's coming next will shake the foundations of Moscow's entire war strategy. This was only the beginning. What looked like an ordinary moonless night along the occupied coast turned into one of the darkest chapters in Russia's modern military history. Hours before the explosion, a lone Ukrainian F-16 took off from a discreet airbase somewhere in central Ukraine. It flew low, hugging the contours of the land, radar signature nearly invisible. Its pilot call sign Falcon had spent weeks training for this exact mission. He knew every radar pulse, every blind spot in Russia's defense grid. And as he approached the target, guided by pinpoint NATO satellite data, the Russian radar screens stayed eerily quiet. The jet was a ghost. Inside the Russian base, officers were relaxing. Some were eating late-night rations, others playing cards, believing themselves far from danger. No alarms, no sirens, just the hum of distant generators. Then, in less than 20 seconds, everything changed. The ground trembled, the sky split open, and a flash of light turned night into day. The first precision missile hit the main command bunker, vaporizing it instantly. A second tore through the ammunition depot, setting off a chain reaction that sent shockwaves across the peninsula. Russian soldiers ran for cover, many never making it out. Cameras mounted on nearby drones captured surreal footage, armored vehicles tossed like toys, storage hangars bursting into flames, entire sections of the base collapsing in on themselves. By the time Russian anti-air systems responded, the Ukrainian jet was already gone, vanishing into the night sky like a phantom. According to leaked Russian military logs, air defenses never even registered the incoming strike. The S-400 system stationed nearby failed to engage, some say due to electronic jamming. Others claim the radar operators simply weren't expecting an attack from that direction. Either way, the result was catastrophic. Within minutes, the nerve center coordinating dozens of Russian drone and missile operations was gone. And this wasn't a random target. This base had been crucial for controlling Russian air dominance over Crimea and the Black Sea. Intelligence reports reveal it housed advanced radar arrays, long-range drone relays, and encrypted communication lines linking field commanders to Moscow. The destruction didn't just wipe out hardware, it severed entire chains of command. One Western analyst described it bluntly: it's like cutting the brainstem out of Russia's southern military body. Russian state media initially stayed silent. Then, 12 hours later, they called it a localized fire incident. But the satellite images told another story: massive craters, blackened earth, and what appeared to be dozens of destroyed vehicles. Western defense experts quickly confirmed it was a precision airstrike, not sabotage. Behind the scenes, panic erupted. Commanders scrambled to re-establish communications, while drones launched from neighboring bases attempted to survey the wreckage. But Ukraine was ready for that too. Within hours of the initial strike, secondary drone swarms targeted recovery teams, forcing them to retreat. It was a coordinated, multi-layered operation, carefully planned and flawlessly executed. Sources inside Ukraine's Air Force revealed the mission was weeks in the making. The F-16's route was tested multiple times, using decoy drones to map out radar frequencies and intercept patterns. When the real mission came, every electronic pulse was anticipated. NATO intelligence satellites reportedly provided real-time monitoring, feeding Falcon the precise window to strike. It was like threading a needle at Mach speed, said one Ukrainian pilot. And while the tactical success was enormous, the psychological impact was even greater. Russian soldiers began posting anonymous messages online, describing confusion and fear spreading through nearby units. "If that base wasn't safe, nowhere is," one wrote on Telegram before the post was deleted. Commanders reportedly ordered troops to relocate further inland, fearing more strikes. Supply convoys halted, unsure if the routes ahead were being watched. For the first time in months, Russian logistics froze. Inside Moscow, intelligence briefings turned chaotic. Generals blamed electronic interference. Engineers blamed human error. Propaganda chiefs blamed foreign hackers. But none could explain how a single fighter jet had pierced their most guarded airspace and annihilated a fortress base without warning. By evening, rumors surfaced that several senior officers responsible for the sector had been quietly detained for investigation. The Kremlin was desperate to assign blame. Meanwhile, Ukraine's defense ministry released a brief, cryptic statement. Precision delivers justice. No details, no bragging, just a confident assertion that echoed across social media. The message was clear. Ukraine had entered a new phase of warfare, one where precision, intelligence, and timing could cripple an enemy stronger on paper. In the following hours, reports surfaced of fuel shortages across nearby Russian bases. The destroyed hub had been a refueling point for drone fleets and supply trucks moving toward the front. Without it, operations ground to a halt. The famous southern corridor Moscow relied on was suddenly blind and broken. Even pro-Russian military bloggers admitted, this is a logistical nightmare. Crowds of Russian civilians living near the impact zone fled in panic. Highways jammed with cars, trains overloaded, gas stations emptied. For miles, people watched black smoke rise like a pillar, marking Russia's vulnerability. The once untouchable empire now looked fragile, trembling under the weight of a single precision strike. But behind the scenes, what made this operation even more extraordinary was its coordination. Military insiders claim this wasn't just about firepower, it was about data. Ukraine combined its new Western aircraft, satellite guidance, and artificial intelligence-driven target selection. Every move was calculated down to seconds. The strike wasn't spontaneous, it was surgical inevitability. By morning, the footage had spread globally. News channels ran looped clips of the burning base. Analysts on CNN, Sky News, and BBC all repeated one phrase: "This is the moment that changes the battlefield." Across Europe, officials praised Ukraine's precision, while in Moscow, silence grew heavier. Putin's administration reportedly went into emergency meetings, restricting internal communications. The word saboteur began circulating. Kremlin insiders whispering that Ukraine may have had help from within Russian ranks. And yet, the truth remains simple. A $30 million jet just exposed the cracks in Russia's trillion-dollar defense stream. No matter how much propaganda Moscow spins, no one can deny what every satellite camera saw: an empire's vulnerability laid bare in one blinding night of fire. But the most shocking part? What happened next? Because even as Russia tried to recover from this blow, Ukraine wasn't done. Within hours, new explosions rippled across neighboring regions, each one linked to the same command system that had just been destroyed. And for the Kremlin, that was the true nightmare. This wasn't an isolated attack. It was the first domino in a chain reaction that no one in Moscow could stop. Stay tuned, because the retaliation, the panic, and the fallout that followed would push Russia closer to chaos than ever before. And what happened next caught even NATO by surprise. When dawn finally broke over the smoldering remains of the Russian base, what followed was not silence, it was chaos. In Moscow, panic rippled through every layer of the command structure. What started as disbelief turned quickly into fear. The Kremlin corridors were filled with shouting generals, scrambling aides, and stunned analysts. No one had expected this. No one could explain how a $30 million Ukrainian fighter jet had just exposed the soft underbelly of Russia's military machine. Satellite photos flooded intelligence channels worldwide. What they revealed was devastating. Dozens of aircraft incinerated on the tarmac, radar towers bent like molten steel, entire fuel reserves turned into ash. But the physical loss wasn't what truly terrified the Kremlin. It was the realization that Ukraine now had the reach and technology to strike deep into Russian-held territory, right where Moscow felt safest. The illusion of control had vanished overnight. Russian state TV tried to contain the story. For hours, anchors repeated the line that it had been a technical malfunction. But as foreign media broadcast footage of the burning base, even loyal citizens began to doubt. Telegram channels exploded with messages from soldiers' families demanding answers. A mother in Rostov wrote, "My son was stationed there. They told us everything is fine. But he's not answering." Another message simply read, "They lied again." And that was the spark. Across Russia's southern provinces, unease turned into unrest. Crowds gathered outside local recruitment offices, chanting for their sons to be brought home. Police were dispatched, but videos of the protests spread faster than they could be deleted. In cities like Belgorod and Voronezh, rumors swirled of entire units refusing deployment until air defense systems were repaired. For the first time since the start of the war, the cracks were visible not just in the front lines, but within the Russian home front itself. Meanwhile, NATO intelligence agencies watched the chaos unfold with cold precision. Within hours of the strike, Western command centers confirmed that Russia's air defense network had suffered a systemic breakdown. In Brussels, a senior official described it as the most significant disruption of Russian command integrity since the Cold War. The United States released a carefully worded statement praising Ukraine's remarkable defense coordination. London went further, calling it proof that aggression has consequences. For Kyiv, the victory was both strategic and symbolic. The Ukrainian Air Force issued a short, calm message. Target neutralized. The sky is ours. It was more than a boast, it was a declaration that the balance of power was shifting. Inside Ukraine, the footage played on giant screens in public squares. People cheered, cars honked, flags waved. The atmosphere felt electric, almost defiant. For a country that had endured endless bombardments, this was vindication, a moment when the hunter had become the hunted. Back in Moscow, the fallout only deepened. A confidential Kremlin memo leaked later that day revealed that several high-ranking officers had been detained under suspicion of negligence and sabotage. Analysts say it's part of a desperate attempt to shift blame and silence dissent. The system is devouring itself, one insider whispered to Western journalists. No one wants to be the next scapegoat. The military crisis began to spill into the economy. Oil shipments from nearby ports were delayed as transportation routes came under threat. Insurance rates for Russian cargo tripled overnight. On the stock market, defense contractors saw their shares plummet. Even the ruble dipped sharply as investors sensed panic behind the propaganda curtain. But what truly rattled Moscow was what came next. Within 48 hours of the strike, a coordinated wave of cyber attacks crippled several Russian logistics networks. Communication lines between southern bases went dark. Supply trains halted. For 2 whole days, Russian field units operated without updated coordinates. Whether these cyberstrikes were Ukrainian, NATO-assisted, or internal sabotage remains unclear, but the timing was perfect. While the Kremlin was still reeling, its entire southern command system collapsed into confusion. By the 3rd day, the scale of the disaster was undeniable. Independent analysts confirmed that the destroyed base had been central to managing drone and missile strikes against Ukrainian infrastructure. Without it, Russia's ability to launch long-range attacks was cut by nearly 30%. The once fearsome drone storm that had terrorized Ukrainian cities suddenly went quiet. Kyiv's skies were clearer than they had been in months. Across Europe, the response was immediate. NATO commanders convened an emergency meeting in Brussels. The message: Ukraine's air power works. Military aid discussions accelerated. Norway pledged new missile stocks. The U.S. confirmed an additional shipment of spare parts for the F-16 fleet. Even cautious countries like Germany began hinting at larger defense packages. What had started as a single strike now ignited a diplomatic chain reaction. In the Kremlin, the mood grew darker. Intelligence intercepts reportedly captured conversations between senior generals describing total strategic paralysis. Some called for massive retaliation. Others warned that another failure could spark domestic collapse. Putin himself remained silent for nearly 2 days, a silence that screamed louder than any speech. When he finally appeared on television, his hands gripped the podium tightly. He called the attack an act of Western terrorism, vowing revenge. But behind that facade, officials whispered that his tone sounded shaken, his eyes hollow. As Russia vowed retribution, Ukraine was already planning the next phase. Defense officials hinted that similar strikes could follow. The message to Moscow was unmistakable. Nowhere is safe. And yet, Kyiv's leaders carefully avoided overconfidence. Instead, they spoke of strategy, of precision, of patience. "This is not the end," said one Ukrainian officer. "This is the beginning of ending Russia's illusion of invincibility." The psychological impact inside Russia was immense. Social media flooded with speculation, fear, and fury. Hashtags like "Number where is our defense" and "Number silent generals" trended across Russian networks before censors shut them down. Soldiers' relatives began forming online groups demanding answers. The cracks in the propaganda wall were widening faster than Moscow could patch them. Then came the whispers that terrified the Kremlin more than any missile could. Reports began circulating that mid-level officers were refusing to fly missions without enhanced air cover. Supply convoys demanded armed escorts just to travel inside Russian territory. Some regional governors even requested anti-air systems for civilian centers, fearing further Ukrainian strikes. The fear had metastasized from the battlefield to the home front. Western analysts now describe the attack as a turning point, not because of the physical damage, but because of the psychological reset it triggered. Russia, once projecting power and control, now looked defensive and uncertain. NATO saw an opportunity. Ukraine saw momentum. The war had entered a new phase, one where precision, intelligence, and morale mattered more than numbers. As smoke continued to drift from the ruins of the Russian base, the world could feel that something fundamental had shifted. It wasn't just another explosion in a long war, it was a statement. A declaration that technology and willpower could bend even the mightiest empire. And deep inside Moscow, they knew it too. Every commander, every politician, every propaganda host, they all felt it, the fear that the next explosion could come even closer. And so, the question now hangs over the Kremlin like a shadow. What does Russia do next? Retaliate blindly and risk escalation? Or admit the truth that its power is crumbling from within? Because make no mistake, this was more than an airstrike. It was a warning, a message that the days of impunity are over. The $30 million jet didn't just destroy a base, it destroyed the myth of Russian invulnerability. And as Ukraine's flag rises higher, the world is asking, can the Kremlin recover from this humiliation, or is this the beginning of the end for Putin's war machine? Let me ask you, watching right now, do you think Russia can still control this war after what happened, or has Ukraine just rewritten the rules forever? If you believe this moment changed everything, hit like, share this video, and subscribe, because the next chapter of this war is unfolding faster than anyone expected. And trust me, you'll want to see what happens next. This is Breaking News War Stories. Stay tuned for the next shock from the front lines.